40 years? Holy smokes.
Kind of dating yourself.
Yeah, a little bit. Thank you. Right, I think you touched on everything. I also do a little bit of farming on the side. I do some forage hay, about 500 ton a year, and then I sell pretty much all of that. And I've got a waiting list about this long, and I was visiting with one person that came out and fixed a tractor tire not too long ago, and he goes, he needs hay. And so he asked me what I sell my hay for, and he says, you know what, can you put me at the list someplace? Because he says your prices are really low. So I think I'm going to shorten my list by increasing my price on my hay this year. We'll see.
We're not talking about economics.
Okay, we'll get to it. So, you know, in this session, I wanted to cover a lot of basics, but most of you have high tunnels. There's 2 of you don't. Actually, Quinn, you got a high tunnel. You don't have a high tunnel yet. You don't. But so I'm going to go through the basics. So I don't mean to bore you, but I'm going to throw some stuff in here. And then the other part is while we're talking, it'd be great if some of you that have some experience speak up and talk about it, because we have a lot of different situations in this world. Okay, things I'm going to talk about: purchasing a high tunnel location, construction considerations, wind, soils in the high tunnel production, and food safety consideration. I'm not going to talk much about food safety. I think it was really great Thursday they had this here. So, but there are some links in there. And Christine, is this going out to anybody, the PowerPoints, or should I have them go around, should sign up to get the PowerPoint?
If you send us the link, I can send it out to
Okay,
everybody.
perfect.
But up to you how you want to.
No, that's fine. So, funding. There is some funding out there. There's an EQIP program that provides some funding. I used to think it covered materials, but it doesn't cover materials even so much anymore. And if you have that handout, if you flip to the back, I'll stop and talk about this handout. So on the front of this handout, I've listed some manufacturers for those that are interested in purchasing. Let me grab a couple handouts here. That are interested in purchasing some of a high tunnel. I don't list them all. You got one, Quinn?
Yeah.
I don't list them all, but what I do is list the ones that I'm familiar with that other producers have used. And probably the 2 most common ones is the Greyhawk high tunnel and the Polytex high tunnel. Those are 2 that are pretty commonly used throughout North Dakota as far as manufacturers go. The other one is FarmTech. FarmTech is a little bit more expensive, but it's also a little more durable high tunnel too. So, but those are kind of the 6 of them. The Haygrove, I'll talk a little bit about Haygrove. Haygrove does have a roll-up side that roll all the way up to the peak, which is a little different. Some people want to maybe try to open up their high tunnels a little bit more. And I just go through and I just kind of give you an idea of some of the ups and downs of high tunnels in here, but on the last page, do I give you any place where I talk about the pricing for it of high tunnels? I don't.
There's some prices of other stuff mentioned there.
Okay, is there a spreadsheet someplace? Not on this one, okay. The cost of, so when I look at the NRC EQIP program, they cover about 80% of the cost of the material right now. And it used to be they covered more, but high tunnels are going up pretty quickly. I did check with some of the high tunnel companies, and they say there's about a 4 to 6 week lead time right now, so it's not terrible. If you want to buy purchase a high tunnel, you just need to start planning for it. If you're going to go through the EQIP program to get that financial assistance, you can't do any buying or anything at all. You can get a quote, but you can't put any money down until you sign off on that EQIP program. So, and
That means that there's certain requirements that they have that you follow.
yes, there's certain requirements. Example, high tunnel must be a minimum of 6 feet tall. And they want you to have the rafters and the bows spread so far apart. And I'll go through that here as we go along too. So there are some of those requirements. It used to be that you had to be on land that was farmed already. Well, that's kind of gone away because an example is at my brother's farm, at Bruce's farm, he wanted to put one in the yard. And so that has been our yard for 70 or 80 years. And so we were able to go back and find a picture way back when when the land was farmed right up to the house. So then we showed them and said, they go, oh, okay, yeah. So it was farmland at one time. It was maybe 80 years ago. And so that got to be kind of an issue. And so the NRCS just kind of dropped that and said, okay, we'll work with it. And I know, like, if Lori Martin was in here, she's in a subdivision area. But that all used to be cropland too. So anyway, so that is an option to go through the NRCS, and you need to go through a process. First thing is you go into Soil Conservation District and visit with them, and then you need to go over and sign up at FSA that says basically that you make $1,000 a year on some farming project, and then you can qualify for this EQIP program. So. Dakota College has been doing a lot of the technical assistance for NRCS for like 5 or 6 years. And we have funding that they've provided us with so that we can go out and talk to different groups. We have a project right now that we're working with Minokan and then also in Foreman, North Dakota. And that's a high tunnel project, mainly a high tunnel project, but we're working together as 3 different locations.
Are you talking about the Minokan farm?
Yeah, Minokan Farm.
Is there an additional project for putting up another high tunnel or the one that they're using now?
There is an additional project coming up. It's not really out in the public yet. Where,
I'm trying to keep my mouth shut, but I'm not very good.
yeah. That's all right. You're probably a little bit aware of it.
My
But,
son works out there.
oh, okay. Yep. And so I can just speak to that a little bit. So last fall, Minokan and Foreman, North Dakota, which is, what is that, wild rice? Minokan and Foreman, North Dakota, and then Dakota College, we all went together and we asked for 10 high tunnels to be built in these 3 locations, either here, over there, or up at Dakota College, and we received a grant. So there will be that coming out this summer where we're looking for producers who want to put up a high tunnel. There might be a little bit of a requirement as far as doing some monitoring of soils, soil health and soil nutrients, that type of thing, but
So what I think you're saying is that this is kind of like a joint project
It's a
with
joint.
an individual, but it's also being, as part of the process with the NRCS that are involved already in
Yeah.
this kind of a project?
it's a project. So, and the nice thing is the producer is going to get some technical assistance over it. So,
Is it gonna be right if, no, I probably better quit asking questions. Move on.
okay, I'm going to move on. So you got that handout. You know, one of the things I tell people when they start to ask me a lot of questions about high tunnels, I just say, come up and visit us at Dakota College. We can show you different sizes, different shapes. We can show you different manufacturers. We can show you how we handle the things inside of a high tunnel. So please do that. If you haven't, if you're just getting into this, please come and visit us. We'll be happy to spend some time with you. 2 types of high tunnels. You can kind of see the difference here. One is a Gothic style, it's got a peak, and the other one's got a Quonset style, more of a rolled type. We tend to recommend the Gothic type just because snow seems to slide off of that better. We do have a Quonset type, haven't had any issues with it though. So, but we do notice that. And when I talk about snow, we get a lot of snow built up, but it gets warm in those high tunnels and it slides off pretty easy. So we don't usually have snow for very long in the high tunnels. I know where we're at. I don't know if others do.
We get a lot of wind.
Get a lot of wind, yeah. Yep, and I'll talk about wind. So rafter spacing, the EQIP program really would want you to do a 4-foot rafter. They don't require you to do it though. 4-foot rafter spacing, that's the spacing between the bows on each one of them. So typically the more rafters, the more bows you have, the more stable the high tunnel is. Anchoring is extra. You don't normally get that with the high tunnel package when you get a high tunnel package from a manufacturer. Covering, there's usually a 4 mil and a 6 mil. I strongly recommend that you go with a 6 mil covering, and that has some UV protection. That UV protection keeps that plastic from getting brittle on you. So strongly recommend to use that. Just a side note, UV protection, so what it does is it reflects the ultraviolet light, right? Insects, pollinators use UV light to see. We use what? The reds, the greens, and yellows. So we get a white light to see. Insects use more UV light. So when you get insects in there, if you noticed or not, but they all bounce off of the plastic all the time because they get a little bit of UV light through it, so they head towards that. And so when they enter into a high tunnel and you have your sides rolled up and you drop your sides, it's dark in there for them. It's hard to believe, but it is. It's dark in there. They can't see real well without UV light. So just a little side note. So if you want pollinators in your high tunnel, couple things. Put something that along the sides of the high tunnel that draws them to that point, and then keep your sides up so that they can see what's going on in there. So, talk about single layer, double layer plastics. Anybody do double layer with airspace? You what?
The one I will put up.
We'll have that, yep. A lot of people do the single layer plastic. The woven coverings, I'll show you some pictures of that, but it's actually got a woven, it's like a fabric that's right in the plastic with it. It's a little bit more durable to a point, but then I'll talk about that. And then of course we have roll up sides or roll down sides, and I'll get into some of that. Some of the basic terms, and when it comes to instructions from the manufacturer, they're ugly. They're not very good. They are not. If you have never put up a high tunnel, you're going to struggle a little bit. So, but these terms you'll see, like a polyethylene cover, or some call it a skin. There's a different parts of the high tunnel. Of course, we got the purlins, pretty common on most buildings. You can probably have 2 or 3 purlins on each side. It kind of depends on the size of the high tunnel. And then we call this the hip board. That goes across here. That really is to hold the plastic in place and then also hold the roll-up side in place. We'll talk a little bit about baseboard. There's a lot of different types of baseboard that's used. And the system to put it up. So these are bows or rafters. Some people call them rafters. So when you purchase a high tunnel, you'll get an end with them, and that's kind of what it looks like. It's a piece of plastic over the end. I can tell you right now, they don't last very long. You may get a year or 2 out of them, but most of the time they don't last very long. So, if that, yeah. Because once that wind starts to flop them back and forth, they don't last very long. So you need to be thinking about what else you can do beyond what you're going to get in that package.
And Keith, they don't tell you in the instructions. They don't even say be wary of wind conditions. They just
Right.
sell it to you.
Right. They do. They just sell it to you that way. You think you're getting a complete package. You are in their minds, but it's not something that's going to last you. So, And we'll talk about end walls. Actually, I think I talk about that next. Okay, so there are a lot of different ones. This is an end wall that you can get with the manufacturer. Sometimes you can ask them for the option for an end wall, and they'll send you an end wall like that. A lot of people will put up this type of a frame on the ends where you've got like 4x4s or 6x6s that you as posts, and then you come off of that with like 2x6s. So that's a much sturdier way of doing it. That'll last quite a while. I've seen this before too, where you're just kind of doing a stick type on the ends, and that works too. I tried the stick one on my high tunnel, my first high tunnel. It really didn't last the way I wanted to because that still wasn't solid enough. So you really need to get some posts in the ground with some 4x4s or 6x6. What do you use? Do you use did you buy a frame with yours?
No, I got 4x4 cedar posts.
Yeah.
Put those in and then use 2x6s off of that.
Yeah. And that holds pretty good.
It's held very well.
Yeah. But we don't want to brag about it because then it'll change on you, right?
No, because we got our high tunnel through Equip,
Oh yeah.
and there were requirements to keep it in a spot. And the wind took it down at least twice that I can recall off the top of my head. So when that Equip contract expired, I moved it,
Yeah.
and September will be 10 years that it's been standing.
Standing, yeah. Yep. Baseboards, you know, it's really critical to have baseboards along the bottom, and it really holds that whole structure together. So you don't really have much anchoring going on there unless you decide you're going to concrete each one of those rafters or bows in place. And so that baseboard kind of makes everything go together. I've seen one where they didn't tie them together, and some of the bows were lifted up when a real strong wind. So it's really best to use a baseboard. This is a composite material that we have at one of our greenhouses or high tunnels at Dakota College. The only issue I have with it is a composite. It kind of breaks down after a while, especially when it gets wet. And so a little bit of an issue there. On my high tunnel, I just taken steel, like steel siding, and split it down the middle, and then I put steel all the way around, and that seems to work pretty good for me. So there is you can purchase for the end walls. You don't necessarily need to use you can use like a polycarbonate. That's a polycarbonate in that bottom one. In my high tunnel, what I did is I went to Menards and bought this corrugated polycarbonate material, and that works relatively well for me. Anybody else have any ideas on things that you use?
We just framed the ends and tinned it.
Yeah.
When it got like a regular,
Tin end, the whole thing.
yeah, well, then we had a garage door built in there so you can drive stuff in.
Yeah, that's nice. NRCS has, I wanted to tin mine all the way up because I thought that was a good idea. But they have a requirement where you have to get light on the ends of the high tunnel too. So when you get done with the contract, then go back and do it right. I shouldn't say that, but.
I got you, to speak up into my pencil, what's your mark?
Well, this is going to be public, so. So roll-up sides. This is that Haygrove one that I was telling you about where you can roll it all the way up. I think there's times when that would probably be great, especially if you were in a situation where you maybe didn't want to water all the time or something, but I don't know.
I think the effect of it would be good because it gets so dang hot in there, and
Yeah.
summertime you would that would be a resolution to that problem. However,
Right.
the wind that we have in North Dakota, I don't know how you keep that thing together.
Yeah, I agree. There's hand cranks. This is a hand crank goes up to that location. It's called a one-on-one hand crank. So every one is one revolution on the pipe that fits in here. This pipe that goes and wraps the plastic up as you go. There's a 3-to-1 crank where you crank 3 times, but it's a lot easier to crank than that. If it's on a short high tunnel, then a 1-to-1 isn't so bad. Otherwise, if you want to make it easier on yourself, you can use a 3-to-1 crank. And then that top picture is a motorized type. Minokan Farms has that out there. And they've got it set up so that when the temperature gets to be a certain temperature in the high tunnel, it opens up the sides. So I think if I were ever to do it, I'd probably set it up where it would be timed rather than on temperature. I just want it to open up in the mornings and close in the evenings. Yeah, I just don't want to I don't want to go out that early, yeah. So there are those options available. So everything is kind of screwed together. And my experience with the high tunnels that we've had at college and myself is that these screws at some point will come loose or loosen up a little bit. And when this screw in this position loosens up, it usually widens that hole. So then you've got an issue with trying to keep that clamp tight. On all the screws were on the bolts like that, I've double nutted them, and it seems to help a little bit to keep them tight. But it seems like once we tighten them up after a period of time, usually the end of the summer or 6 months later, we go back in and tighten them up. Then they're good for quite a while. I mean, I don't see an issue with that.
Most everybody's got it, high tunnel here, so.
Yeah, there's 2 that don't. Yeah.
Which one? Thinking hard about getting one?
I've got plans of one going up this spring. Yeah.
What kind of a one are you putting up?
It's one I got, a kit through Bootstrap Farmer. It's basically, you just buy pipes and bend them yourself, so it came with.
Yep. Yep. So let's see, one other thing I was going to say about that. Oh, I'll get to the covering them up.
The one you got there is anchored in the ground. I recommend that.
Yeah. Yep.
You get side anchors with the 2x8 or whatever you got along the bottom, but if you anchor them in the ground, of course you gotta, when you get them down there, it's like putting in a post, or maybe you can get rent a machine or something that'll pound them in, and then you just assemble it into that. But we got a big one, and we've had hellacious winds, and it's never had a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen where guys have taken like well pipe or something and pushed a well pipe 5-6 feet down into the ground and then stuck that pipe in and bolted it in place too.
That's good.
Yeah, that works pretty good. Tape. So one of the things we often think about is, of course, all those sharp edges and whether it's going to rip that skin or not. But we also tape, and we also recommend that you tape every bolt that sticks through that in which that plastic is touching. I mean, even if they're rounded, that becomes a point that wears at some point in time, and that's where you'll start to get some holes. So tape everything, duct tape everything if you can. It doesn't look the greatest, but it kind of makes that poly last a little bit longer.
Since it's not directly in the elements, have you seen that last long without degrading from just the sunlight and the heat sitting on it? Or you go with like the all-weather Gorilla tape?
Oh yeah, we usually get a little bit better quality tape. Yeah. Okay, which way do you face your high tunnels? So that's always a question, and I've gone back and forth with a lot of people on that. I don't think it's as big an issue as what some people make it. Most people say east and west because as you think about the sun that comes up in the east and goes in the west, you get more sunlight. You actually do get a little bit more light in your high tunnels in the early spring and the late fall if you go east and west. But when you think about it, high tunnels are not something that's used really early in the year. So by the first part of March, it doesn't really matter. the sun is up high enough and you're going to get enough sunlight either way in your high tunnels. So I wonder if I can flip to something here. And I'm just trying to justify what I just said is what I'm trying to do. Okay, so light is important for photosynthesis, right? Plants need a certain level of sunlight at all times, and at Dakota College, we're monitoring our outside sunlight all the time. Every day of the year, we monitor it. And you could see here, we monitor it in units, and it's called DLI, Daily Light Integral, and the formula is micromoles per meter per day. And what we're doing is measuring every photon of light that comes down and hits the surface. And there is a range in which light works for photosynthesis, typically from your ultraviolet all the way up into your reds. And there's a middle part. There's one color that does not work real well. It's not good for photosynthesis that plants don't use. Anybody have an idea what that is in the middle? What color are plants? Green. Right, so plants don't use much green light, but they use all the other lights, the colors of the light. So we measure that, and so here's the units. Typically in February we're right around 15 units of light a day. So what does that mean? Well, lettuce needs about 10 to 12 units of light a day to do really well. Tomatoes need 20 to 25 units of light a day to do really well. And a lot of your vine crops need 15 to 20 units of light a day to do really well. What I'm trying to say is that already we're getting very close to having enough sunlight here on March 4th, which was kind of a partly cloudy day. We had over 20 units of light. We could grow tomatoes outside in the high tunnel, but it's not warm enough, right? So what I'm trying to say, going back to which direction that high tunnel sits, from this point on, it doesn't matter whether it's north or south or northeast, south, west, or east or west. It doesn't really matter which way that high tunnel is from this point on. That goes all the way to about the 20th of October. So don't get hung up on orientation, that's what I'm saying.
Could you also use the argument that if you're going with solid, non-visible end walls, you're losing that light until the sun actually even gets above that wall?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's see. One of the other things with sunlight is, of course, sometimes we like to put it along tree lines where it's protection or close to tree lines. We want to make sure if those trees are on the south side of that high tunnel that you've got enough distance. And of course, the taller the tree, the further away you need to be with your high tunnels. So be thinking of that. This is a good time of the year to, if you're going to put a high tunnel, walk out where you want to put your high tunnel and just see what kind of shadows you have. So it'll only get better. Shadows will only get shorter. Think about wind protection. You know, there's a lot of different situations I've seen where people have put a high tunnel kind of along a tree row, and there's an opening in the tree row. We get what we call a Venturi effect, where that wind comes through and it speeds up and it's more force. Well, that's tough on high tunnels if you put it close. I've seen situations where somebody's put a high tunnel along a windbreak, like a quarter-mile windbreak, and they've put it on the south end of that windbreak, and you typically get northwest winds. You're going to have issues with that at all times. It's because that wind speed picks up. So be thinking about how that works best. When it comes to wind, we have 6 high tunnels at the campus. We lose 1 a year to wind, one poly top a year to. So just the way it is. I mean, we get about 4 years out of a sheet of poly at ours on site. So we do 1 or 2 a year, high tunnels a year that we cover.
How big are your high tunnels?
The smallest one is 24 by 40. The biggest one is 40 by 96. And then we've got a bunch in between. Soil, before you go to put up your high tunnel, it's really good idea to go in and prepare your soil, get it ready for the way you want it, rather than to try to do it after the high tunnel is up. You can do it that way, but if you're going to put the high tunnel up and then come and prepare your soil, maybe leave the ends out or something, or do it before you put your ends in. So that first time around, especially if you're doing it on sod. And of course, you want to make it someplace where you can get to it relatively easy all the time. And the other part of that is of course, then you need to be close to water. So water is really important in a high tunnel. You don't have any real other ways to water a high tunnel. I'm going to come back onto that one too. So construction, you know, I had my first high tunnel that I put up. It was 30 by 72, and I put it up by myself, but I had my Bobcat to help me. So, and I made an attachment for my Bobcat, so I put the bows together, and then I had lifted it up and put it in place. But
I thought all you guys hired kids to do all that.
yeah, it doesn't always work anymore. Yeah, so it's just kind of for the basics for if you're going to have a bunch of people come out, make sure that somebody knows how to run a drill. I remember the first high tunnel we put up at the college, or not at the college, but for somebody else, and we had some people come out, and one person hurt their wrist right away because they didn't hold the drill right, and they got their wrist twisted. And I mean, it just sounds like simple things that we all know about, but not everybody knows how to do that, to run a drill. So coverings, we all have probably different methods of put coverings on. Typically, we'll lay the roll out along the side, and then we throw ropes over the high tunnel. And then what we do is we'll take like an apple, or depending on the season, I know we've done potatoes in the fall, or tennis balls or something like that, or baseballs, and we take that very side of the plastic, we put the ball inside, and then we wrap that rope around it, and we throw it over the high tunnel. And so then we have a crew then that pulls that plastic over. And I know like on a 72-foot high tunnel, I like to have like 13 or 14 people, 6 on each side, and then a couple people floating around, so looking at things. And just pulling that over. One of the things you'll see with any people that haven't done it before is somebody always tries to pull way ahead of the others, and then you get things kind of oblong. But the other part, other important part is that as you pull it over, there'll be catch points. You don't even realize it because you think you got everything taped up, but there'll be catch points where you could end up ripping your plastic a little bit. So it's good to take it slow. My experience is that we do it in the mornings usually, when the wind isn't really blowing. You don't want to have hardly any wind at all, of course, because it's like a big kite.
Before 10 o'clock.
Before 10 o'clock, yeah.
10 o'clock and after.
Yep.
It's in trouble.
Right,
North Dakota average.
yeah. But you know, it doesn't take too long. It probably takes an hour, hour and a half.
That's because you got 14 guys.
I think you're wrong there. Well, maybe I do. 1, 2, 3. This, yeah. So these are students, of course, but it is. You're right. Yeah. We always make sure we have plenty of people around when we do it to pull that plastic over. And it's surprising. This is a group of students that wanted to come over. They're from Turtle Mountain, and they wanted to come over and do something. I said, well, we'll put you to work weeding. They wanted to come over for one day, and then we realized, April, our farm manager, goes, we could cover a high tunnel this day instead. So we put them to work covering the high tunnel.
And they would come back again.
Yeah, no, they don't
They
come
were
back.
weedy, they just
Yeah.
come back.
No, yeah, right. And then, of course, we use wiggle wire with a channel all the time. Here's the channel, and so as you pull that plastic over, you put the wiggle wire in. That works really well. I know there's, I've seen where they've taken and put 2x4s along the side, and then they've used lath to do it too. That could work, I guess. This is rather convenient. The only thing about this is a lot of times after a year or so, right in those areas, if you have to pull it apart, you'll see holes. It's actually worn through. There is a Teflon wiggle wire now that you can get that supposedly eliminates or reduces that issue. The other thing is when you go to put this sheet over the top, you can use a single channel. This is a double channel because a lot of times you'll stop with that single sheet and then you'll have your roll down as a second sheet. And so you end up putting a second wiggle wire in there to keep it in place. You can get a double channel to do that. Does anybody just do one sheet over the whole thing? From top to bottom, you do? That works
We
too.
got sidewalls, we just go to the sidewalk.
Just to go to that hip board and that's it. Yep. A lot of people do that. Just go to that hip board and then continue on. So this is a separate sheet down here with the roll-up side. Let's see, I'm going to go back there. Oh, we're going to talk about this hook too here in a minute. Maybe that's next. Nope. Huh, strange. Yeah, I'm going to talk about it right now. So that roll-up side will flip in the wind if you don't have some kind of ropes holding it in place. And so typically you'll have those hooks kind of every other location at the bottom, every other rafter, and at the top, of course, you've got it every other one. One of the things you'll learn rather quickly is you don't want to do a shoestring type thing all the way through because when that rope breaks, then the whole thing falls apart. The best thing to do is to go up here, tie it down here, go up here, cut, tie down here, do the same thing over and over again. So if one of those breaks along the way, the whole thing doesn't fail on you. So it's hard to see on here, but when you roll up sides, there's two different ways that I've seen people do it. People roll it so that the roll rolls on the outside of the plastic. Others will do it so they roll on the inside of the plastic. And so what happens in a situation where you're rolling so that the roll is on the outside of the plastic is you get rainwater and dirt, that type of thing in it. And it does tend to stain it if you're really concerned about that. If you want to do it the other way where it rolls on the inside of the plastic, then you don't get that buildup of material in it.
Do you rope or batten strap over the entire structure on yours at all?
Good question, because there's several different thoughts there, and that's mainly to do with wind, right? So I've seen where they take this strapping that's 2 inches wide, anchor it down on one side and go over to the other side with it. And so with plastic, when it gets to blowing in the wind, it kind of billows on you, and that billowing causes stress along the lines where you've got your wiggle wire. And so that's where you tend to get the ripping going on to start with. So that strapping does help with that. The one thing about strapping is anytime that you contact surface with plastic, something ends up wearing in the wind. So that's another situation. I've seen that where they put strapping over and then you start to get some wear through spots along that strapping.
Because that was just the main thing where my issue was with the last one was it didn't billow. The lift was so strong from the wind. It just held it and held it and held it until finally at that channel, it just
Yep.
finally gave way.
It gave way,
With
yeah.
flow. So that's the part I'm trying to consider.
Mhm.
Is the back to hold that.
So does anybody tell me what they do? Do you just do you have issues with plastic? Do you have to replace it every 4 or 5 years, or if you get a really strong wind, do you lose it?
think we went with some pretty, good stuff to start off with.
Yep.
I don't know how long we've had it, I bet it's probably getting closer to 10 than we like to measure. We had a hailstorm that put little dents in it all over.
Yeah.
It's still there, and we gotta be careful not to open up the door on one end and not do the same thing on the other end, because we got a big door on each end, so you gotta make sure you don't end up, blowing it up.
Yeah.
And it'll pop sometimes, pretty good, when the wind's going through there, even when the door's closed or whatever, it'll crack pretty good, but so far it's still there, but I suppose it's time to start thinking about getting it replaced, but
Yeah.
we'll probably do that when she gets plants all going good, and it'll blow away, and then it'll be freezing that night, and then we'll think we should have probably done something sooner.
Something sooner. Do you roll your sides down when it gets windy?
We've never done
Yeah.
that because we haven't, we don't keep it in, we kinda use it to start things in the spring.
Yeah.
And then when she gets a bunch of good plants, she puts them out in the garden, then we're done with it, but
Yeah.
ours go up, they pull from the bottom up.
Okay, they roll up.
Yeah, they roll up, and
Yep.
and there's no roll, it's kind
Oh,
of between two pieces, two ropes, two small ropes.
Sure.
And so if you pull it up, it's stretched, straight, but if you wanna put it down, then it goes down to the ground, and then it just kinda
Yeah.
fills up in the inside of there.
Right.
But we basically don't open it up, because we don't use it it gets pretty darn hot in there in the summertime. I don't think you can grow anything in there, even with the sides down.
Okay. Yeah. You have trouble with wind?
Of course. But the best example I can give you is, I was out there working one day, and I went home for lunch, and I came back from lunch, and the plastics just flying all over the room. And this is a 48-foot long high tunnel. So after that, I made a change, and Holly recommended I not do that, but I did it anyway. I got rid of the roll-up and just clapped it down right to the seat
Sure.
of the baseboard. And it's been there all these years, but it does get quite hot in there. But
Don't you have something up above on the ends though?
no, that's in the greenhouse.
Oh, that's in the greenhouse.
That's in
Okay.
the greenhouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been holding, but it will get hot in there. So
Yeah.
I have double doors. I open them up, and I've got those louvers that I open up, and so
Louvers. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
You don't use it in the middle of the summer, though, do you?
What's that?
Do you use it in the middle of the summer when it's really hot?
I do have cherry trees in there.
Oh. I think if we had cherry trees in there, it would probably caught fire.
Well, it doesn't get as hot as the greenhouse.
I'm doing all right in time yet, aren't I? Okay.
We got about 15 minutes left.
Oh, good. We don't have to have the discussion part because we're having it at this part. So I can talk right up to the last minute. Couple of things. That one thing that I've done was, you put two layers of poly on, and if you can get some air in between them and keep that, a lot of times that gives you a little bit of extra protection. To be honest with you, I put 2 layers on whenever I recover mine, and I don't put anything in between them. I don't put air in between them, but I leave them just a little bit loose, both layers. And if you watch on a really windy day, that top layer tends to fight against the bottom layer. It creates areas of vacuums, and so then I got this constant back and forth, and I don't really get much of a rippling effect or pressure put on the wiggle wire all the way around. So that has worked for me. It's worked a lot better than having a single layer on before. So.
When you were talking a little while ago, you were talking about going over the top in between the rafters with, I guess.
Strapping?
I've never had, on this, I've never used more than just one layer, but I would think that if you did that on the closest in layer and then went over the top without anything holding it down, you'd probably have a pretty good air group,
Yeah.
in between.
Yeah, you would. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you put the 2 layers together, you put one on and then you put the other one on?
Yep. And I don't pull them tight. The one thing is, and about putting plastic on, if it's warm day and you pull too tight, it will rip away from the wiggle wire too at some point.
That's what, like when it's 40 degrees below zero.
Yeah, yeah. You look out there, it looks like a solid sheet of glass while in between, but it's tight. So
50 degrees is when you want to put it on.
yes, 50 degrees is a good time. When that's in the mornings, it's cooler usually. So
Before 10 a.m.
yep, before 10 a.m. Some things in the summer. I put summer winter, but summer, of course, watering and weeding is important. Checking those ropes to make sure that they're still okay. You need to do that year round. Ventilation, we just got done visiting a little bit on that, and then checking your skin covering. Gosh, we've talked a lot about wind. I can show you some pictures. So this is a common thing if you buy that package and you put that on. This is usually what it looks like after the first year. This material with the fabric in it, it doesn't always rip as easy, but one of the things we noticed, that we did 2 high tunnels at Dakota College, and it is more durable, but wherever you have a contact point, that wears a lot quicker than regular poly does. I don't know why, I suppose it's the weight or whatever, but we ended up getting a lot of tears wherever we had a bow. So what I'm saying is I don't think there's a lot of benefit to it. I know there wasn't for us, but
Do you use shade cloth at all?
no, we don't. We have shade cloth, we just never put it on. It's a pain. But I think it would,
They got the Minokan farm.
They
got
do.
it up.
and I think it does add to the life of the poly too.
I would think it would be a better weight distribution with the batten strapping to keep that wary
Mhm.
separation, and then you can put the weight of that. That's my plan on one
Yep.
of them, is to do that, because it does get so
Yeah.
hot, because I don't have the roll-up sides.
So if you were gonna put it on, how would you put it on, like, if you have rafters, or you just, how would you?
The ones I've seen, they put it on the outside of the high tunnel right over the top of the plastic.
And they don't probably have it on all year round.
No, they
It's
don't.
not supposed to come all the way to the ground either. So
No.
you have to working from the top to get it.
Yeah, you need to pull it over like you do
Like
plastic.
an extra layer you put on
Yep.
temporarily.
Right. And so you can get different levels of light through it too. I mean, you can get a 40% light to 60% light. If you get a 60% light in the summertime, you're getting enough light to grow tomatoes even, so. So it's shade cloth would work. Oh, just some more pictures of wind. I put those out there because it can happen, and it most likely will happen at some point. These we hope don't happen, but that was where they kind of got a straight wind, and it was a 60, 65 mile an hour wind, and it just pushed that center of that high tunnel right down. So.
I mentioned to Keith before we started, he probably heard it before. I think the first year that they had the equip for the high tunnels in the state, they had a bunch of them out there. And I think 90% of them blew away the first year.
Yeah.
You know, trial it, learn what you need to do different next time.
Right.
So when we, in terms of structuring, we hadn't really mentioned it, I don't know if this did or did not, a lot of pictures don't have a center truss going across. In our case, may not have saved it.
Mm-hmm.
If this did not have it, would that have helped? Because the one I have does not. And while it does sway a little bit, if you put a center truss, I think my setup would still want to sway to the point that weight would still want to push it.
Sure.
I don't know.
So you're talking about the purlin that goes all the way?
The cross purling.
Yep,
that would go
yeah.
On the same hoop. I should
Yep.
say.
And those are especially important with that Gothic point type. You really need to have those in there. And the other part about it is, I don't know if I talked about it, but you can kind of see this bar right here. This bar looks like it's backwards, but typically you have a bar that goes this point up to this point. Oh, there it is right here. And that really supports that end. So you need to have that protection, that wind protection in there too.
Well, we may have just been lucky haven't had a problem, but I think probably what I would say is that probably be a good idea to overbuild it,
Yeah.
you know. 'Cause I think that's what happened, they were built to some kind of specification at first, and it was probably, economical, and, everybody had the idea that'd be great, and then next year they didn't have one.
Yep. Yep. I think we've learned a lot about high tunnels in North Dakota. Hopefully we have. Water is, of course, important. If you get this, if Christine sends this out, this is a link to a YouTube, and it explains how you can put a water catchment system on your high tunnels. And one of the things that we always kind of underestimate is the storage of the tanks that you're going to put the water into. You'd be surprised how many gallons an inch of water will give you off of a high tunnel. It's a lot.
Did you say that's a link?
That is a link. Yep. Yep.
I'd be very interested in that.
Yep. It's a really good link. I don't want to get into it because I don't have much time, but it is. And so if you could send that out, I'll send a PDF of the slide presentation. Click on that link. That's a really good link. And then also we do have one rain catchment system at Dakota College too. So if you want to see how that looks at how it's set up, feel free to stop by.
Back next Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, it's 4 feet of snow, but
Okay.
you know the issue. So start with productive soil. Soil testing, I feel, is important. You got to know where you start from. And so get a soil test. I'll show you a couple of places there. There's kind of different methods of fertilizing in high tunnels. I use a lot of composted horse manure. We have horses. I do that. I put that in the fall. Then I come in with a sprinkler system and I just totally soak that and get that in. There are fertigators where you can hook it up to your hose, your water line, and then that'll put in a certain amount of nutrients all the time into your soil. So, and you can vary that throughout the year depending on what you think your needs are at different times of the year. You don't need to put all your fertilizer at the beginning of the season. You can do it throughout the season that way. So, some people will just come in and broadcast a fertilizer into their soils, at the beginning of the season too. When to soil test, that's kind of up to you. We say fall. I don't do it in the fall. I do it in the spring, but fall, because if you look at the testing labs, that's when they have the most time to do it. And we all know that we wait to the last minute to realize we should probably do a soils test, and so we don't get the results back before we plant. So I'm that way. So that's why I do it in the fall. It's more of a planning thing. Couple of places, NDSU and then AgVice out of Northwood, North Dakota, a couple of good testing sites or testing places in North Dakota. AgVice, they have a website where you can go to and you can order your bags and your forms and everything, and there's no charge for it. So it's a good place to start. NDSU is a good place too. Of course, there's a lot of different mulches. We usually use a mulch to cover the ground to reduce weed issues and also kind of conserve your moisture. And there's plastic, there's fabric, paper, organic matter like your grass and leaves and straw and that type of thing. Some people use pea rock down the center of the aisles. Seems a lot of work to me. Roller crimper, where they come in and put a cover crop and then they crimp that cover crop in place. That's good too. I use plastic, I guess, for what I do. I have a machine that does it, or a piece of equipment that does it. Then we talk amendments a little bit. The soil itself. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of the oxygen that a plant gets comes up through the root system. So we have to have that porous soil type that we can get the air into the system, and then also it fills up with moisture. So the other thing with good amendments is that kind of conserves some of that moisture too. It holds it in place until the plant can use it. Some examples: compost, manure, peat, and biochar. I'm running out of time here. But I do want to talk about salts because we have a number of sites where we see salt issues. And when we went to put that high tunnel in place, we didn't have a salt issue, but a lot of times the water we're using has a salt problem, has some salts in it. And that just builds up in a high tunnel. There is really no system to flush in a high tunnel. So we get these salt issues from the water that we use. What I'm saying is really should test your water and see what you can do, see what that salt level is in the water. Get salts from irrigation. Compost is one. We had one producer that came in and put in a bunch of compost, thought, great, we're going to have a great crop, and then that year they didn't have much of a crop at all. But the compost they purchased had a lot of salts in it. And so that kind of screwed them up for a while. Some soils will leach, sandy type soils, sandy loams will leach a lot of that salt out. Clays type soils will not. Here's an example of, if you're seeing this kind of a situation, not only that, but you see white on top of the soil, right? You may see this in your plants. So kind of managing that, there's a couple of things you can do. Of course, you watch what goes in. Rain catchment systems kind of help you out a little bit because then you're not using a lot of that water that may have some salt in it if you can use a rain catchment system. Some people, if they're going to have to replace their plastic, they'll wait and replace their plastic in the spring so you get that snow and water that's kind of from the snow that's washing out some of the salts. And there are some salt-tolerant plants too. So why do I say salt-tolerant plants are an opportunity? Whenever we take like beets, that plant is able to take up some of those salts. And so we're removing those salts when we remove that beet, that plant itself. So that's a good way. Some are not very tolerant, like beans. You're going to have issues trying to grow beans in a salty soil. And they don't take up any salt either, hardly any salt. So there's those to be considering. The important thing there is if you've got some salt issues is to remove all that plant material every year. Get it out of the high tunnel. Then you're pulling some of the salts with it. pH, we often think that our soils maybe a lot of our soils have like a 7.5 to an 8 pH in that range. But you start to look at how that affects the nutrient uptake of plants. And you can see here at 8, you can see where this bar kind of narrows and you see those red marks. That means that the plants are not able to take up that nutrient because that pH is high. And example is a lot of time, iron is a perfect example where we'll see leaf yellowing and then the veins are really dark green. It's called chlorosis. And we say, oh, we got to go out and put more iron in it. But it's really the pH, the high pH is keeping that plant from being able to utilize that iron. And so a lot of our soils have plenty of iron in them, but our pH is kind of high. So something to consider, something to think about. You can use chelated iron, and that iron is really in a form in which the plant can still take it up. So it's something to think about. So a lot of our soils, like I say, are in this range right here. Irrigation, there's kind of 3 methods that I've seen in high tunnels. The drip method is where you're really applying that water right directly to where the plant is at, down the row with the plant. There's the soaker hose type, and that's a hose that kind of gives out water all the way through. And then there's a sprinkler system. And I don't recommend sprinkler systems just because it creates a lot of humidity issues sometimes in the high tunnel. And then also you get that splash where if you've got low-hanging fruit, where you get splash off the soil and potentially have some food safety issues. So. And this is just an example of the different soil types. You can see sandy soil, the water typically is a narrow band that goes down. Loamy soil is a wider area, and then of course clay is more spread out because water isn't going down quite as easy. So, running out of time, right? Am I out? Kind of.
Okay.
Okay. So what to grow, and this is a tough question to answer. What to grow, there are some things that do really well in high tunnels for a lot of people. The nightshade family does relatively well, where you've got tomatoes and peppers in it. Cucumbers do relatively well in a high tunnel too. But you really need to look at your market and see what you can sell in your market, what works well in your market. The one thing about high tunnels is it extends the season, so it gets you a little bit ahead in the market. Say, for instance, on tomatoes, typically if your tomato market's really blooming with a lot of tomatoes, say the middle of July and on, a lot of times you can hit that earlier market and get a little bit better price with tomatoes. So, anybody want to say what they think is what is probably their best in their high tunnels, what they think they do well on? Basil. And you've got a market for that. Yep.
I had a lot of luck with celery inside
Celery?
versus out.
Celery really has a different flavor taste. It's a stronger taste for us. Yep. You like it? I kind of like it. Yep. Yep. So what to grow, it's a tough question. But Minnesota has done a ton of work in high tunnel production. And this slide, if you click on this Minnesota high tunnel production, they have like a 140-page manual that goes through all of the different vegetables. And I think they even get into some of the fruits, and they talk about plants and diseases, nutrient requirements for each one of those. So if you get this slide presentation, take a look at that. Purdue also has one on high tunnels for cucumbers, if you want to do cucumbers. So that information is out there. North Dakota doesn't have much, but you're always welcome to give me a call because I can tell you what does well where we're at. So. And I think that's about it. The stuff we've covered. Trellising, don't use your high tunnel to hang stuff from any more than you have to. And I'm bad at it, but if you get a tomato plant that could have 25 to 40 pounds of tomatoes on it, then you think about having those all the way across the line. That's a lot of weight on that truss or that rafter, that bow. So trellising, try to figure out some kind of a trellising. There's just different methods. Steel posts with that has netting on it, but I've seen where they use hog panels. These are more the post types where they have a frame inside their high tunnel. And last one, real quick. You really shouldn't grow any hot-blooded animals in your high tunnels. What does anybody know on manure? How long you should wait before you plant in that?
120 days?
Yeah, 120 days. So what I'm saying is you can have chickens in your high tunnel right up till springtime, but then you should wait 120 days before you plant in the high tunnel.
I thought it was before harvest.
Well, yeah, I guess if you're doing radishes, it might be earlier.
Yeah, it's harvest, and as was mentioned Thursday, it can't be a frozen ground time period either.
Right.
So it has to be a frozen ground.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is it's either for chickens or for plants, but I've seen people do it, so. That's it. Thank you. Thanks.